on lessons from Joseph. So I'm not sure, I might go over into the next week, but anyway, we're drawing to the end of this series, and I would really encourage you to please get this teaching. I think it would really, really bless you. We've already covered so much material that there's no way I can go back, but Joseph is just one of the great characters in the Bible who went through adversity that most of us have never even come close to going through, and he kept a good attitude. For 13 years, God gave him 2 dreams in the 37th chapter of the book of Genesis, and in these dreams he was exalted. His brothers and his father came and bowed down to him. And yet, from that time that he got that vision and purpose for his life, everything in his life seemed to be going in the opposite direction. And you know, there are people watching this program that maybe you have a dream and you feel like God's got more for you than what you're experiencing, and yet most people just crumble under things like that. They get a bad attitude, and yet Joseph, it was just phenomenal how that even when he was in slavery, he was a prosperous man and he had a great attitude. And he was so faithful to Potiphar that Potiphar just gave everything that he had, all of his business, everything to Joseph, so that it says in Genesis chapter 39 that he didn't even know what he had except the food that he ate. It's all that he knew. Joseph was faithful, faithful, faithful. Bitter, angry people are not like that. People that have unforgiveness in their heart and are licking their wounds and focused on all of the things that are wrong, that have been done wrong to them, do not have that attitude. And then Joseph was lied about by the master's wife because she tried to seduce him and he rebuffed her. And so because of that, she lied and said that he had come in, tried to rape her, and Potiphar wound up putting him in prison. And even in prison, Joseph excelled. So much so that the keeper of the prison didn't know anything. He just turned everything over to Joseph and he took off, was on a vacation. Joseph was such a faithful man. And it was during that time in prison that 2 of Pharaoh's officers had been put in prison. And even though they were in prison, it was unusual for them to be sad. Joseph came in the 40th chapter of the book of Genesis and said, "Why are you sad today?" Most people would go, "Duh, you're in prison." But it was unusual for people in Joseph's prison to be sad. They were probably treated better, loved and cared for more under Joseph's ministry in prison than they had ever been before. And they had dreams. God used these dreams to eventually get Joseph out of there. He interpreted these dreams. And man, we've been through so much. There's so much in here that if you've missed any of this, please go back and get this teaching, because man, there were some awesome things. The last thing that I was mentioning is that one of the greatest character traits of Joseph that I believe is phenomenal, and this has been a tremendous inspiration to me, is that even when he became basically king over Egypt, he was second only to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh gave everything to him. He said, without you, a dog or a person can't even lift their hand in this country without your permission. He gave him absolute control. And even when Joseph had that much power and control, he didn't do anything to make his vision come to pass. Now, some people, that you may not catch this, but that is really important. Some people serve God when their back is against the wall and they have no options. And even though it may be a desperate situation, what option do you have? The only chance you have of ever getting through this is for God to come through. So some people will serve God through adversity, and that is good. That's better than giving up. But the greatest, I believe, indication of the integrity that Joseph had was when he had all power. He could have made his dreams come to pass. He could have taken the armies of Egypt. He could have gone and surrounded his brothers and made them bow the knee. And yet Joseph didn't do that. To me, that is one of the greatest indications of where his heart was. And many people might say this differently, but let me say it this way, that you know what that is? That's humility. Most people think of pride as being arrogance. And it's just lifting yourself up and thinking you're better than everybody else. I've already dealt with this to some degree, but Moses in Numbers chapter 12, it says he was the meekest man on the face of the earth, and he's the one that wrote that. Meekness is not just beating yourself down. If God was to say you are the meekest person in your business or in your family or something, would you be meek enough to say it? Moses wrote in Scripture that I am the meekest man on the planet. Man, that's amazing. And see, most people think that pride is arrogancy. I've also said that pride can be just debasing yourself. If you've got low self-esteem, if God says that you can lay hands on the sick and they shall recover, and you say, oh, I can't do that, well, then that's pride, because you've exalted your opinion above God's. A truly humble person is a person that just doesn't have an opinion. Basically, you have died to yourself. You've put God in control, and if God says something good about you, you say it, because you aren't there to promote yourself, but you are there to honor God, and you would interpret and represent Him correctly. If God said something negative about you, you would go ahead and admit it and say that. Here's another thing, and this is what I see in Joseph, is that to me, another way of describing humility is when you are not taking control. You aren't doing things in your own strength and power, but you have come to the end of yourself and you're depending on God to make things come to pass. Now, some people might not recognize that as humility, but let me share some scriptures with you out of 1 Peter in chapter 5. It says in verse 5, it says, likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble. Again, some people would think, well, God resists these people that are arrogant and that think they're better than everybody else. Well, that's included. I also believe you could say that God resists those that have such low self-esteem that they won't believe that they have become the righteousness of God. They won't let God exalt them. And that could be pride. And I also believe that you can say those who are just content in dealing with things under their own power. They only turn to God when things become unbearable, when it goes way beyond them. And if you'd be honest, this is where the vast majority of Christians live, is that they do things on their own. Like when it comes to sickness, and man, I hesitate to say this because people will take it out of context, misunderstand what I'm saying, but there are some people that honestly only depend on God for healing when it goes beyond the medicine, when it goes beyond your homeopathic remedies, when it goes beyond the doctors, when you've done everything in the natural, then you pray and ask God. I believe that that can be pride. That is depending upon self. It could be the same thing in business, that a person, just believes that, man, I've got a good brain, I'm supposed to do all of these things, and they only wait until they reach a crisis before they turn to God. And that's one of the reasons that they come into crisis, is because they've done things on their own. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not unto your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths. And I could back that up with dozens of other scriptures that are basically saying the same thing. We shouldn't lean unto our own understanding. We shouldn't do things in our own strength, and only when it goes beyond us do we turn to the Lord. We need to be God dependent all of the time. Moses, when he was asking to see the glory of the Lord over in the book of Exodus, I think it's chapter 34, the Lord said, I will be with you, and I will go with you and guide you. And Moses, his response was, he says, God, I was taking that for granted. If you aren't going with us, I'm not moving from here. Wow. And it just so happens that that was the meekest man on the face of the earth. That's one of the things, see, that is a real characteristic of humility, is that you don't have any confidence in your flesh. This is what Paul said in Philippians chapter 3, I believe it's verse 3, the last part of that verse. He says we have no confidence in the flesh. And then the next few verses he goes on to say, if any other man thinks that he has a reason to boast in his flesh, he said, I could boast even more. Paul was one of the most educated men of his day. He was passionate. He was zealous. He persecuted Christians to the point of death. And I mean, Paul was more accomplished, more educated, more passionate in the natural than most people. But after he had this encounter with the Lord, he came to the end of himself and he said, I have no confidence in the flesh. And he went on to say there in Philippians chapter 3, he says that he counts all things that he had lost but dung compared to knowing Christ and be found in him. See, that is a humble attitude. And I see that in Joseph. Right here, Joseph, after he became the most powerful man in Egypt, he could have done things in the flesh. He now had all of the power that he needed to bring these visions to pass. And yet, for 9 years, 7 years of plenty and 2 years of famine, Joseph didn't do anything to bring his vision to pass. Instead, he just served Pharaoh. He did what he was there. He recognized that, yes, he had these visions about his brothers and his father coming and bowing down to him, and he knew that that was coming. But he had been exalted. He had been given authority and power, and he had a job to do, and he was serving Pharaoh and doing what he was called to do. And so during those 7 years of plenty and 2 years of famine, he had 2 sons that were born to him. Pharaoh gave unto him a wife, and Joseph went from the pit to the palace in just a matter of hours. Man, what a great testimony. But did you know, again, many people will serve God when there's no option, but when they all of a sudden see a breakthrough and now they are in prosperity and everything is going their way, there's been more people destroyed by prosperity than there has ever been destroyed by hardship. And one of the greatest lessons is Joseph just was faithful. During those 7 years of plenty, he was collecting all of the extra grain, preparing for the famine that was to come. He built treasure cities, he built buildings and put all of the grain in there. And then during the first 2 years of famine, he just continued to serve Pharaoh and do what he was told to do. And he didn't do a single thing to make his dreams come to pass. But when we go on over, let's go to Genesis chapter 42. It says in verse 1, it says, Now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, Why do you look one upon another? And he said, Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt, but Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, Lest peradventure mischief befall him. Benjamin was the only son left from Rachel, and because of that, he wouldn't send Benjamin down with the other brothers. And so there was only 10 of the 11 brothers of Joseph that came down to buy the grain. And it says that Joseph was the one who was overseeing the selling of grain to all of these people. Now again, Joseph was probably the second most important person in all of Egypt. I'm sure he could have delegated this job to somebody else. Anybody who was doing what he was doing, I can guarantee you they had thousands of people selling food and doing all of these things and doing this. And yet, Joseph was specifically overseeing the selling of all of this grain. I believe that that reflects the fact that he knew that just being exalted to this position and himself having success and having a family now and children, it wasn't all about him. He still had a purpose, and he was overseeing this, and specifically, I believe he was looking for his brothers. Those 2 dreams are what kept him. You know, the scripture says in Psalms that until the word of the Lord came, the word of the Lord tried him. And so Joseph, I believe, was still looking for those dreams to come to pass, and he was overseeing this. So when all of the brothers came down into Egypt to buy grain, he saw them and he recognized them, but they didn't recognize him. And Joseph began to sell the grain to them, but then he turned on them and he said, You're spies. And he began to accuse them of being spies. And so these men said, let me just read this to you. Genesis chapter 42, verse 5, it says, And the sons of Israel came to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan, and Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold all of the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. You know, some people might think that this was a fulfillment of the dreams of Joseph, because in those dreams it showed them bowing down. But I don't believe that Joseph recognized this as the fulfillment, because for one thing, it says he saw all of his brethren, the 11 sheaves. If you go back to Genesis chapter 37, that means that Benjamin was one of those that came and bowed down to him, and Benjamin wasn't with them. So this wasn't a total fulfillment of it. Plus, I also believe that the Lord had made it clear to Joseph that this was much more than his brothers just coming and bowing down to him, the physical act. It showed that they did it willfully. And I've made this point already, but I know not everybody watches this program every day, but Joseph's brothers were evil, wicked men. Reuben, the eldest son, had committed incest with a stepmother. Simeon and Levi had murdered hundreds and hundreds of men. And I mean brutally murdered them and took all the women and children of an entire city captive. And Judah had committed incest with his own daughter-in-law. Simeon and Levi were the ones that killed all of those people, but Issachar and all of the others, they had participated in selling Joseph into slavery and had lied to the father for 22 years. These were wicked men. And I believe that Joseph saw that there was more than them just physically bowing down. This was showing that they had humbled themselves, that they had been brought to their knees, and that hadn't happened yet. And it was Psalms 105, verse 19, that says that until the time that his word came, the word of the Lord tried him. And if you read this in other translations, this is talking about Joseph. And until he saw this vision come to pass, this word of the Lord is what refined him, is what some of the other translations. That's literally what this word tried means. It means it refined him. And so Joseph had never let go of these dreams. The parallel of this to us is that when Joseph now was in a position that his brothers had come and bowed down to him, he was in prosperity, he was married, had 2 children, he was over the whole land, most people would have compromised. Most people would have thought, well, this is close enough. But did you know Joseph, he had been so dependent upon God that he was not going to compromise. He was not going to take a shortcut to this. Instead, he turned on these brothers and accused them of being spies. He was still trying to get them to come to the end of themselves. You know, let me just say that when, in my own personal life, that the Lord told me that I was going to have a ministry, I was going to reach people all over the world, and I was moving in that direction. But man, there was a lot of years of frustration. And man, it seems like we never had the money to do the things that we wanted to do. And I remember this group coming to me that had raised $22 million for another minister through a letter campaign that they did. And they came and they said that they could guarantee me $1 million. We were much smaller, and they said they could guarantee me $1 million if I'd let them write the letter. And so I said, well, I need $1 million, so come on. So they came and they showed me what they'd done for this other minister. They gave me a sample of what they would do for me. They had it down to the colors that would, excite people, the brackets, the things, the pictures. They were going to put pictures of babies in Africa, with their bellies swollen and eyes, flies crawling on their eyes and things like this. And they said, this is what motivates people to give. And I said, but those things aren't true. I don't have an orphanage. I don't do this stuff. And they said, well, it wasn't true for this other guy that they wrote the letters for. But they said, it doesn't matter how you get the money. I will get you the money, and you can take it if you'll just let us write these letters. Of course, they were going to take a commission off of it. And I said, but it's not true. And they said, it doesn't matter. And I said, it does matter to me. And anyway, I kicked them out. And I said, I refuse to do this. But did you know there was a temptation to say, well, it's a worthy goal. Who cares how you get there? Satan, if he can't keep you from serving God, he'll try and get you to compromise so that you can accomplish that goal but not do it God's way. I believe that Joseph had for 22 years by this time, 13 years in slavery and prison, and 7 years of plenty, 2 years of famine. For a total of 22 years, Joseph had these dreams just directing and controlling his life. and he refused to compromise. Some people would have thought that this was enough and he could have revealed himself to his brothers right then, but they had not yet humbled themselves, and he was not going to take a shortcut to get God's will accomplished. Boy, there's a great lesson here. I'm out of time today, but I am going to continue this on my program tomorrow. And again, I tell you, you need to learn these lessons from Joseph, because if Satan can't keep you from serving God, then he'll try and get you to compromise on your way to doing what God called you to do. Compromise is a language of the devil. Don't do it. Whatever you compromise to get, you'll lose. Whatever you compromise to keep, it'll be stolen from you. You just don't need to do that. Boy, what a shame if Joseph would have compromised after standing strong for all those other years. But praise God, this is another great example of Joseph and how he stayed strong with the Lord. So let me again promote this little booklet entitled Lessons from Joseph. This is just a 50-page summary of this 200-page book, and we are probably, the end of this week is going to be the end of my teaching on this. And so I believe that this would really help you. These are powerful truths. And we also have CDs and DVDs, and then a USB that has the CD and DVD on there. And we are making all of these products available to you. So listen to our announcer as he gives you information about how you can receive these products. And please call or write today, and join me again tomorrow as we continue the gospel truth.
Andrew is offering his booklet, Lessons from Joseph, as his free gift to you today. This booklet is limited to one free booklet per household. This offer is available in the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. Contact us today to receive your free booklet. Andrew's complete series, Lessons from Joseph, is available as a book, newly updated CD album, TV, DVD album, and USB made from our daily television broadcast. This entire series is also available for audio download, absolutely free from our website. We also want to remind you of Andrew's Living Commentary software. The Living Commentary includes more than 50 years of Andrew's Bible study notes and personal encounters with God. Get Andrew's Living Commentary today for $135. Go to our website at awmc.ca to see all the ways you can get these products. Or you can call the Andrew Womack Ministries Canada Helpline Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time at 647-348-2220 to order.
I'm pleased to announce that we now have my television program translated into Spanish. We have a lot of my materials available in Spanish, but let your friends know that we're now broadcasting our daily program in Spanish.
Man, I appreciate you guys taking the time to check out Army, check out the benefits. As a member of Army, you become part of Andrew's big army of ministers that are ministering with him, and we're mobilizing people around the Word and the direction that God gives Andrew. Plus, you get Andrew's live Bible commentary. Then we also get 4 Charis Bible College courses per year. Your name gets placed on a list where when people call to know where to go to find, where's a church that I can attend that believes this message and teaches like this, and the benefits that you get are just, I wish I would have had these when I pastored.
Would have helped.
And I just want to encourage you to check these benefits out. We can do more together than we can individually and on our own.
And I tell you, encouragement is something that is hard for ministers to come by, and yet this is what this Army is all about. So the